Islands at the edge of the world, Japan didn't rise from open plains or endless rivers. It rose from rock, fire, and water. Almost 7,000 islands, floating like broken blades in the Pacific. Mountains everywhere, volcanoes sleeping with one eye open, forests so thick they swallowed sound. Narrow strips of land pressed between stone cliffs and restless seas. This wasn't a place that welcomed conquest. It demanded patience, discipline, respect. Isolation shaped everything. Japan learned early how to keep the world at arm's length, close enough to learn from, far enough to stay itself. Influences came from China and Korea, but they were filtered, stripped down, reshaped. Nothing was copied clean, everything was remixed. Out here, survival meant structure, and structure eventually gave birth to warriors who didn't just fight, but served. The word samurai comes from sabarao, to serve. Not to rule, not to dominate, to serve. That idea alone changed history. Chapter 2, Spirits before swords, before armor, before castles, before emperors. There were spirits. The earliest people of Japan lived close to the land, hunting, fishing, gathering, listening. The forests weren't resources. They were alive. Rivers weren't water. They were voices. Mountains weren't obstacles. They were gods watching silently. This was the Jomon world. No kings, no armies, just survival and reverence. They made pottery before most of the world even figured out farming. Clay shaped by hand, marked with rope patterns, baked in open fires. Art and utility were never separate. Everything had meaning. Their beliefs didn't vanish. They evolved into Shinto, Japan's native way of seeing the universe. No holy book, no single god, just kami, forces, ancestors, moments. This spiritual backbone stayed, even when swords arrived. Chapter 3. Rice changed everything. Around 900 BCE, the game flipped. New people arrived from the mainland, bringing rice farming, metal tools, and hierarchy. Rice wasn't just food, it was power. Whoever controlled water, fields, and labor controlled everything. Villages turned into territories. Territories turned into clans. Clans turned into rivals. This wasn't chaos. It was organization tightening like a fist. Burial mounds rose, massive keyhole-shaped tombs for elite rulers. Weapons buried with them, armor, horses. Signs that power was no longer just spiritual. It was military. Japan was learning a hard truth. Peace doesn't survive without force behind it. Chapter 4. Writing, Gods, and Imperial Blood. When writing arrived from China, history finally got a voice. But Japan didn't just record facts. It told stories, big ones. The imperial family claimed descent from the sun goddess. Not metaphorically, literally. This wasn't ego, it was strategy. Divine blood meant unquestionable legitimacy. Chronicles like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki mixed myth and memory, building a narrative where the emperor wasn't just ruler. He was the axis of the universe. Even warriors would bow to that idea for centuries. Chapter 5. Court life and quiet rot. Kyoto became the center of elegance. Silk robes, poetry contests, incense games. Beauty mattered more than strength. Aristocrats mastered aesthetics while provinces burned quietly. The Fujiwara family ran the court like a chessboard, marrying daughters into power, ruling from behind curtains. Politics became performance. But outside the capital, different story. Tax-free estates spread, local strongmen hired muscle. Protection became a business, and that's where the samurai stepped in. Chapter 6. When warriors took the wheel, samurai didn't storm the capital overnight. They crept in through necessity. Protect land, enforce order. Collect taxes, fight bandits. They lived hard lives. Practical, ruthless when needed. Loyal to whoever paid and protected them. Two clans rose fast. The Taira and the Minamoto. When they finally clashed, Japan exploded. Chapter 7. The war that broke the old world. The Genpei War wasn't just a civil war. It was a system crash. Battles on land, battles at sea. Brothers killing brothers, emperors drowning with their banners wrapped around them. When the Minamoto won, something unprecedented happened. Instead of ruling through the court, they built their own government. The shogunate, the emperor, stayed sacred, but powerless. The samurai now ran reality. Chapter 8. Steel meets silence. Power moved to Kamakura, far from poetry, close to blood. Samurai became administrators, judges, and warriors rolled into one. Loyalty wasn't abstract, it was contractual. Serve well, keep your land, fail, lose everything. Zen Buddhism spread fast among warriors. Less ritual, more discipline, more silence. Death wasn't feared, it was rehearsed. Chapter 9. Chaos returns. Peace never lasts. The shogunate weakened. Regional lords grew teeth. Japan fractured again into non-stop warfare. This was the age of warlords. Backstabbing, sieges, betrayal, ambition. Guns arrived from Europe and flipped the battlefield upside down. Tradition got smoked by gunpowder. Only those who adapted survived. Chapter 10. 3 men, 1 nation. Then came 3 monsters of history. Oda Nobunaga smashed the old world with fire and guns. Toyotomi Hideyoshi climbed from nothing to everything. Tokugawa Ieyasu waited, calculated, outlived them all. At Sekigahara, Japan chose stability over chaos. Ieyasu won and locked the country down. Chapter 11. Peace. That hurt. The Tokugawa era brought peace, but at a price. Samurai stopped fighting and started pushing paper. Bureaucrats with swords, honor without battle. They wore blades but lived on stipends. Many went broke. Merchants got rich. The world flipped quietly. Bushido became philosophy instead of survival. A beautiful lie, and a necessary one. Chapter 12. The world knocks. Then black ships arrived. Steam. Cannons dot Western power. Japan realized isolation was over. The samurai system cracked under pressure it couldn't handle. And in the end, samurai themselves tore it down. Chapter 13. The end. Without a whimper. No massive revolution. No burning empire. Just transformation. Swords banned, status erased. Samurai became soldiers, teachers, officials, or ghosts of memory. The class died. The mindset didn't. Chapter 14. Peace was a cage. The Tokugawa era sold peace like it was salvation. And yeah, after centuries of blood, people bought it fast. No wars, no sieges, no banners burning in the wind. But for the samurai, peace wasn't freedom. It was a cage with polished bars. These men were raised to face death before breakfast. Now they were filing reports, counting rice stipends, bowing to rules written by other men who also hadn't drawn blood in decades. The blade stayed at the waist, but it rusted in the soul. Samurai became clerks with calligraphy skills and suppressed rage. Chapter 15. When the warrior became a salaryman. Samurai no longer owned land. They lived on stipends, fixed rice payments that didn't care about inflation, bad harvests, or market reality. Meanwhile, merchants, officially the lowest class, were stacking money like kings. That flipped the social script hard. The warrior class had status without cash. The merchant class had cash without status. And everyone knew it. Samurai borrowed money from the very people they were supposed to look down on. Pride swallowed daily. Debt piled up quietly. Honor started feeling expensive. Chapter 16. Bushido gets romanticized. Here's the twist nobody likes to admit. Bushido didn't fully form in war. It crystallized in peace. When there's no battlefield, ideology takes over. Philosophers wrote about loyalty, self-sacrifice, and death before dishonor. Manuals told warriors how to behave, not how to fight. Stories glorified ancient heroes because present reality was boring, humiliating, and bureaucratic. Bushido became nostalgia weaponized into morality, a way to remind samurai who they used to be. Chapter 17. The sword becomes a symbol. Back in the chaos days, a sword was survival. Now, it was branding. The daisho, long sword and short sword, was a walking ID card. Samurai weren't allowed to fight, but they were allowed to look dangerous. Swordsmanship shifted from killing to discipline. Dojos focused on form, breath, posture, mindset. Fighting the enemy became fighting the self. Clean-controlled. Quiet, deadly, but mostly theoretical. Chapter 18. Cities start running the show. Edo, Osaka, Kyoto. These cities blew up. Merchants ran trade networks, artists ran culture, entertainers ran influence, kabuki actors became celebrities, courtesans set fashion trends, writers mocked samurai pretensions through satire and theater. The streets were loud, colorful, alive. Meanwhile, samurai districts were stiff, silent, rule-bound. For the first time, culture stopped asking permission from power. Chapter 19. Women holding the line. While men obsessed over lost glory, samurai women held everything together. They ran households, managed finances, raised heirs, maintained alliances. When husbands were broke, it was the wife balancing books. When men were emotionally locked behind stoicism, women handled reality. Some trained with naginata, some defended castles. Some quietly shaped politics through marriages and influence. History wrote them in the margins. Reality didn't. Chapter 20. Rebellion in small doses. Peace didn't erase anger. It compressed it. Peasant revolts flared during famines. City riots erupted when rice prices spiked. Ronin plotted revenge fantasies. The Tokugawa response was surgical. Crush fast, forgive strategically. Too much force risks chaos. Too little invites rebellion. They walked that line like pros. Chapter 21. The 47 Ronin Problem. Then came the incident everyone still argues about. 47 masterless samurai waited patiently. Played dumb, played weak. Played broken, then struck with precision. They broke the law, but followed Bushido perfectly. The government executed them honorably. That contradiction said everything. The system needed obedience. The culture worshipped loyalty. Those two were no longer the same thing. Chapter 22. Knowledge starts leaking in. Even with isolation, ideas don't stay locked out. Western science trickled through Dutch traders. Anatomy books, astronomy charts, physics. Japanese scholars dissected bodies and realized Western medicine was legit. Maps became accurate. The universe got bigger. And suddenly, old explanations sounded thin. Truth stopped caring about tradition. Chapter 23. Questioning the script. Some scholars went backward, digging into ancient texts, Shinto myths, imperial origins. Others went forward, arguing for Western tech with Japanese values. Everyone agreed on one thing. The current system wasn't built for what was coming. The shogunate ruled, but legitimacy was slipping. Chapter 24. Black ships, cold reality. Then the ocean spoke back. Steamships, cannons flags that didn't bow. America showed up and said, "Open up, or else." Japan looked at its swords, then at iron warships, and understood instantly. This wasn't a duel, it was extinction math. Chapter 25. Samurai turn on the system. Here's the irony that hits hardest. The people who dismantled feudal Japan? Samurai. Educated, frustrated, underpaid, locked out of real power. They rallied around the emperor, not out of blind faith, but because the shogunate had failed its core promise. Protection. The old order cracked from the inside. Chapter 26. End of the warrior class. When the Meiji era began, the sword was officially retired. No more stipends, no more status, no more monopoly on violence. Some samurai adapted, became generals, teachers, bureaucrats. Others rebelled and lost. The last stand ended in gunfire. Steel lost to industry. Chapter 27. A new world, no armor. When the dust settled, Japan woke up in a country it barely recognized. No feudal domains, no samurai privileges, no swords in the streets. Everything that once defined power, land, lineage, steel, was suddenly obsolete. And for the samurai, that hit hard. These were men raised to believe their identity was permanent. That honor was inherited. That loyalty was destiny. Overnight, all of that got wiped like chalk off a board. Some adapted, some broke, some refused to let go. Chapter 28. The last stand that changed nothing. Saigo Takamori didn't want to fight modern Japan, but he couldn't live in it either. The Satsuma Rebellion wasn't about winning. Everyone knew that. It was about dying right. About proving that the old spirit still had teeth, even if the world had moved on. Rifles versus swords. versus courage. When Saigo fell, the samurai didn't just lose a battle, they lost the argument. Chapter 29. Reinvent or disappear. After that, there was no going back. Former samurai scattered into new roles. Teachers, police officers, bureaucrats, entrepreneurs. Some thrived. Others drowned in a world that no longer valued what they were best at. The discipline helped, the rigidity didn't. Those who survived learned a brutal lesson. Honor without adaptability is just pride waiting to starve. Chapter 30. Turning Bushido into a national myth. Japan didn't bury Bushido, it rebranded it. What used to be a class code became a national mindset. Loyalty shifted from lord to emperor. Sacrifice shifted from clan to country. Schools taught it. The military weaponized it. The state polished it. Bushido stopped being personal and became political. Chapter 31. When the samurai spirit went global. As Japan rose, the world noticed. Western writers fell in love with the idea of the samurai. Disciplined, calm, deadly, honorable. They stripped away the messy parts and kept the aesthetic. Books romanticized them. Movies stylized them. Philosophers turned them into symbols. The samurai became less real and more powerful. Chapter 32. War without swords. In the 20th century, Japan fought wars with machines, not blades. But the mindset, still there. Endurance, obedience, sacrifice. Sometimes it inspired courage. Sometimes it justified catastrophe. The same code that once kept order now demanded absolute loyalty. No questions asked. Steel had changed shape. The danger hadn't. Chapter 33. After the fire, a quiet reckoning. After World War II, Japan had to look at itself honestly. The old myths cracked. Blind obedience showed its cost. Honor alone wasn't enough. Bushido softened. Humanity stepped back in. The warrior spirit didn't vanish, but it learned restraint. Chapter 34. Samurai without blood. Today, the samurai live everywhere and nowhere. In martial arts, dojos where discipline beats ego. In boardrooms where silence speaks louder than noise. In design, where simplicity wins. In work culture, where commitment cuts deeper than words. No armor, no swords, still sharp. Chapter 35. Why the samurai still matter. The samurai story isn't about killing. It's about control. Control of fear. Control of impulse. Control of self. That's why it survives. Not because of violence, but because of discipline in a chaotic world. The blade beneath the surface. The samurai didn't lose. They dissolved. They became invisible, woven into habits, values, instincts. The sword no longer hangs at the waist. It hangs in the mind. Quiet, sharp, waiting. And that's the real ending. Not death, not glory, but transformation. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, and comment.